Banking in the European Union used to be really easy. In fact, I remember 2013, 2014, walking into pretty much every bank in Bucharest in Romania, very interesting emerging country, and asking them, so how difficult is it going to be to open a bank account? And they acted like, why would we make it difficult? That's not the case anymore. So I'm going to tell you exactly what to keep in mind if your plan is to bank in Europe. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. What's interesting when people come to me, one of the questions that I ask as part of a diagnostic process is we touch on your willingness to bank in emerging markets. Because here's what happens, okay? People who are coming offshore for the first time are perhaps naturally a bit scared, okay? They look at the idea of putting $1 million or $100,000 or whatever it is that's a lot of money to them in one bank. That's scary. I understand that people want to be able to dip their toe in. And so I say, are we open to emerging world banks where we can just put $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, something that's relatively small in a bank, and you can get your feet wet and get comfortable. A lot of people are comfortable with that, and we find them some great banks that are actually much better than a lot of the banks in their home country. But there are certain folks, some in Europe itself and some from other places that believe that Europe is this great bastion of stability. And in some regards that may be true. Certainly we've seen what happened in Cyprus. You probably didn't see what happened in Latvia a couple of years ago where the banks were really being harassed by the US because of the Russian sanctions. But people like the idea sometimes of banking in the European Union. And so while that used to be relatively easy, times have changed. Here's what's happened. Number one, the European Union, a lot of these countries are high tax, they're developed countries, they're part of the OECD, and they are really working with other developed countries that like high taxes to be very strict. These countries want to make sure that evil rich people don't get their grubby money into the system, and so they've imposed a lot of new restrictions. Okay. One of those restrictions is a lot of countries now want you to have an actual taxpayer ID in order to open an account there. This is something that happened, it started happening really all across Europe. In fact, we sent Jovana, who's on our R&D team, we've been sending her all over Europe recently on long trips, literally going and knocking on the door of every bank, meeting the bankers we already know, meeting other new bankers, and across the board, there might be one bank in each of these European countries, in many cases, that's open to non-residents. The rest want you to have a tax ID because they're looking at the restrictions increasingly put on them by their governments to not take people who could be a problem. And so they don't want the risk, okay? That's the case in Romania. Now, if you go to any of the banks, it used to be a joke. I remember walking in and saying, this is so easy, and they said, why wouldn't it be? The girl literally said, why wouldn't it be easy, okay? What a great attitude in the world of banking. Offshore banking is not easy now. It's easy if you have a list of 800 banks, which is what we keep. But if you're just trying to go in and knock on the doors of banks, you're going to find a lot of resistance because they often don't want non-residents. They want you to have a taxpayer ID, etc. I think this confuses a lot of people because people see the ads for things like Estonia E-Residency where they say, oh, you just get this E-Residence card and now somehow it's easy. Okay. Around the world, you have situations where the government wants to promote business, but the banks are like, there's a lot of rules placed on us. We don't need the risk. We're not hungry for capital. Like, don't take these people. So if you ask a lot of folks who are in Estonia now, there might be one bank who's willing to accept them, e-resident or not. The idea that having an e-resident card means the banks will just take you, no questions asked, was never the case. And it's less and less the case now. Similar to what happened in Hong Kong, where the government wants to promote business, but the banks are very difficult to deal with. You have to really know what you're doing there if you want to bank there, especially on the business side. Okay, and so I think that overall, if you're just starting out in the offshore world, there is this natural misunderstanding where it's like, well, hey, I just walk into my local bank branch in the U.S. or Australia and I give them $100 and that's it. I'm done. That's not how it's going to work in another country. Now, again, if you go and get a residence permit in that country, if you become a citizen in that country, most banks will deal with you. Some still won't. like in Austria, for example, there's a number of banks that they only want to deal with like Russians. But if you're a resident, if you're a citizen, you're probably going to have a pretty easy time. And so there are countries where you can become a resident but not have to pay taxes there, and it might be worth doing. It might be worth buying a piece of real estate in a European country to become a resident and then to be able to access the banking system. But obviously the challenge with a lot of these banks, particularly in Europe, where a lot of countries still have more of a corporate, go get a 9-to-5 job mindset, is, the banks are going to ask you, okay, you live here, you're a resident, do you live here full time? Where's your job? What do you do? They don't really understand, Nomad. And so finding those good banks is a challenge at times. Okay. And so here's how I look at it. Europe is a very interesting place to park money, but I look at Europe as the old world. It is. I look at Asia as the new world. And so what Europe, in my mind, is more suited for is someone who's got a bit more money, who's willing to park it there, either as wealth storage or they want active wealth management from a bank. Plenty of those banks in Europe. In fact, if you go to Switzerland, if you go to Liechtenstein, if you go to some of these higher level European countries, you're going to find a lot of banks that expect you to manage your money, your money for you. Asia, in my experience, developed Asia is more transactional. Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, for example. These are banks where you put some money in, you take it out to do a real estate deal, you put some money in, you're using an ATM card, a debit card, you're sending payments to people, you're receiving money. It's much more, in my experience, open for that. Now, the emerging world banks we talked about are going to be more open to that as well. If you want a bank in the European Union, you're going to want more money, in my opinion. There are banks that will take you with 500 euros, but quite frankly, it's not really worth it, considering some of the fees that they might charge just to keep your 500 euros, because that money will get eaten up in fees in a not so long period of time. But if the European Union is very important to you, I would be looking more towards at least the priority banking. This is not a blanket statement. There are plenty of situations where you could have a bank account in Europe and not have 100,000 euros in there. But in general, if I'm just looking at a general profile, someone who wants transactional, money in, money out, pay a salary, keep money, but not for long. I might want to drain the account down to 10 grand later when I find a house kind of thing. You're going to either be in Asia, in the developed part of Asia, or you're going to be in one of the more flexible emerging world banks. Europe, if you can get in, they're much more conservative. They're much more traditional. They're much more old world. People who are coming from the United States or Australia or somewhere out of Europe don't entirely understand that. They don't understand that you just can't go in, put 100 euros on the table, and they'll be happy to have you. No fees, unlimited checking, here's your free toaster. It doesn't work that way. That's what you should know about banking in the EU. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist. I wrote this book, which you can find on Amazon, to distill a lot of the stuff we talk about in these videos and a lot of the stuff I've learned over the last decade plus traveling all around the world, teaching you about how to legally reduce your taxes, build your personal freedom, and create wealth faster. Definitely get a copy of this book if you want to learn more. Now, if you want to watch more videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel and make sure you click the notifications bell so you never miss one of our new videos with more tips on how to go where you're treated best. And if you're already a 6- or 7-figure entrepreneur and you'd like to put these strategies in place for yourself, go to nomadcapitalist.com and learn about how I can help you.